Hello, nerds.
Oh, James, he can't wait to greet everybody. So first of all, I need to apologize. James was here on time with precision, and I'm using some new software that's supposed to be new and improved. And there was some, as we say in the business, some user error on my part. So sorry for everybody who's been waiting. But I'm guessing there's a lot of people here who, oh, you already have some fans here, James.
Oh, really?
JFK all the way, Yang Gang till the fat lady sang. Oh, we got some poetry.
That's on the YouTube side?
Yeah. It's on YouTube. You'll be able to read all the comments on the replay.
Okay.
So I'm guessing there are some Nerds for Yang viewers who are not super familiar with James Felton Keith, also known as JFK. They might know another JFK, but they don't know the new JFK. So why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, everybody. Well, first off, just again, hello to all the nerds. I think, nerds are driving the world forward. Seriously, we really do need to make America think a hell of a lot harder because we've been floundering for a whole century. We're in a brand new century. With that said, shout out to the old JFK. My name is just James and Felton and Keith, but most people in my district call me JFK because they can't remember which of my names is first. Funny enough, most people just call me Keith, which is not my first name. So I pretty much turn around when anyone yells anything out that sounds like James or Felton or Keith. It could be Frank or Jimmy or Kyle, you name it. That's me. So we sort of sum it all up in those three letters. But I'm excited to be here because we've been nerdy about these issues that we're talking about today for really the past 20 years. And it's a cool thing that now we're living in an era where people are considering economic inclusion in this sort of holistic way. So I'm happy to be here, man. And I'm glad you're doing this video. Like this whole YouTube thing, I wish I would have thought of this years ago.
Well, by the way, a lot of people approve of your mug. One of the Nerds fans says, I don't know who this man is, but I approve of his mug.
Oh, I didn't even realize. Oh my God! Right. So this is a Democratic club here in New York called the Jim Owls Progressive Democratic Club, or Liberal Democratic Club, excuse me. And they gave these out at their last event. They can't stand, 45. I think he's the most dangerous man in the history of America, and I agree with him. But literally, this is the only mug that will hold extra tea and sugar. So I just use this because I'm sort of double, fisting it in one cup.
Well, you must be a busy man if you got to get that caffeine and sugar in you. I noticed you've got a flag on your lapel, so that says to me you're running for office.
Yeah, man. So I just left a church here around the corner called Abyssinian Baptist Church. A really big church, about a 200-year-old Black church. And if any of your viewers know anything about Uptown or Harlem or Manhattan, Sundays is really a big day for tourism in my district, and people come to see, the old Black churches, and it's a political scene as well. Like elected officials are there, hopefuls are there, different community leaders are there. So, you sort of show up on Sunday from about 7 a.m. till noon. You're really touring around doing as many crowds as you possibly can. Similar to how Andrew and the rest of the candidates are in Iowa and New Hampshire. We're on 110th Street and 125th Street and 145th Street, talking about political issues, talking about what we owe us, telling people what UBI is, telling people how, it's a magnifier to the social safety net, that being housing, healthcare, education, and infrastructure, or if you want to call it a Green New Deal, that too. So, this is sort of the middle of my day.
So you just came back from church meeting with the community. You mentioned that you're going to hit the phone banking after this interview.
Yep.
some people are wondering, like, well, what's he running for?
Yeah. So right. So I'm running for U.S. Congress in the 13th district of New York. So that's everything above Central Park. Really, we start a little bit below, but really everything above 97th Street in Manhattan, all the way up to the end of the island. So we have all of the top part of Manhattan and a little piece of the Bronx called Marble Hill and a little piece called Kingsbridge. And that's our district. We represent about we estimate 875,000 people. Most congressional districts should only be about 720,000, but because we're doing a bad job of collecting census data, especially in the state of New York, we've been losing congressional seats for not counting ourselves well. So we represent an overpopulated portion of the district or of the country, really. And it's a really dense place, as most people are familiar with. My district alone, or my neighborhood, Harlem, is actually bigger than the city of Cleveland. And it's only 2 miles from east to west. Yeah, so it's a lot of us sitting right on top of each other. It's crazy.
And so how many Democrats are competing for this seat?
Two of us. So we have the incumbent who came in office 2016, and I ran a race against him. So I ran for Congress in 2018 to sort of build a base and let people know that I was here and that we had plans for this place, among others. And we built a really significant base across. We have a big coalition in climate, a big coalition in Black Lives, a big coalition in housing, a big coalition in LGBT rights, and a big coalition in universal basic income. So those are our 5 bases, and we'll duke it out with the incumbent, who we think has none of these bases, has produced no significant legislation since he's been in U.S. Congress. And even while he may vote the right way per what Democrats think, I think this generation and what we're offering to the American public and the global public are ideas that work in the 21st century. And so we need faces and voices that are unapologetic about defending us in this century and not talking about whatever used to happen eons ago.
So I'm not familiar with this district that much. I'm guessing this incumbent has been in this seat for a little while.
No, not really. Actually, he's only been in the seat a short while, which is one of the opportunities and why we're primarying him. So I think of a lot of people who are running for office, our path to victory is very real, which is why we ran once in 2018. I think I was actually introduced to Andrew Yang after I finished my last race, and mutual friends that we had said, I think you should tell him how you were running on UBI, and so he can add to his broader collective of conversation around UBI. But the incumbent in my district was elected in 2016, but he inherited the seat from a man who was in the seat named Charlie Rangel for 40 years.
Oh, yeah, I remember
Charlie Rangel was sort of shamed out of his seat on a real estate scandal. And then he bowed out of office in 2016, said, I'm old, I'm going to stop running. I love you all. I'm a grand old man. Drop the mic. I'm out. And he picked someone else to succeed him. And that guy didn't run as a formidable of a race as we thought he would, and I was a supporter of his. And so he ran against this current incumbent, and really the party split in half, which has been my opportunity. So my opportunity is to grasp the old coalition that used to exist here, and then take them somewhere new, take them to a new, technologically progressive place that's more inclusive. Because I think the general sentiment around my district is that even while people have been elected Democrats, they don't feel like they've gotten anything for it. And so our opportunity is talking about what we owe us. That's the name of our campaign. And it's bigger than the fact that we owe us a universal basic income or cash in general. But it's really around the courage that we owe us to stand up to the existing systems in place. It's about the dignity that we owe us for inhabiting this tourist riddled place. It's the equity, that we owe us from the changing prices in this hyper valuable place. And so that's really the opportunity. The incumbent hasn't been there forever, but he was in other offices for a good 30 years. So he was a state assembly member. He was a state senator, and you know, people know him, and what they know about him, I think, if anyone, not myself, don't take my word for it, but if anyone were to travel around the district, they would know that this guy doesn't have a lot of fans, and that the constituents don't feel like they've gotten a whole lot from his candidacy.
So really, you're the alternative.
I'm the alternative. Yeah. I'm the alternative.
And do you come from sort of the New York kind of political establishment? Like, have you been? What's your background?
My background. So I'm an engineer. I'm a mechanical engineer turned macroeconomist. I spent a lot of my time in a field called corporate ethnography. For people who aren't familiar, it's really the study of the culture of tech. So I spent a lot of my time advising not only political figures, but CEOs and starting companies of my own to map out how we produce productivity at the corporate level and really automate how we do things at the corporate level. So about 10, 15 years ago, I started to realize that we were moving on a course to automate pretty much everything, mainly because I was the guy that you would hire to come and automate away the work. But to be clear about that, I don't mean automate away jobs. We haven't lost jobs. I'm not of the group that thinks we're going to lose any jobs anywhere. We'll actually have more jobs. They just don't pay anything. Because what we've done, what engineers have done over the first, 20 years of this century, has really automated the way in which we make decisions about how we supply goods and services to people. And because we've done that, and because we've become so productive at doing that, we have to find new ways to include people in that productivity. And so a lot of my work before this, being outside the political apparatus, was really writing policy from an industry standpoint, and then trying to, lobby it into politicians' hands. So I write the vast majority of the cybersecurity policy and the data policy on the planet. You name it. Like, if it exists, I either wrote it or theorized it or lobbied for it at some point since 2009.
Nice. Yeah. Well, we are definitely, I'd love to kind of double click into the stuff around personal data.
Sure.
Especially since a lot of times, a lot of people talked about the freedom dividend as the data check, not just the tech check, since that's a very valuable asset these days. But one thing that you mentioned that I'm curious about is, it sounds like, did you run on UBI when you first ran in 18? Was that so you were talking about it before the Youngster?
Well, yeah, I mean, we all were. To be fair, I mean, Andrew Yang, per what I know of him, was talking about UBI, a while ago. It's just trying to figure out. So the reason I think we're all in politics, I think Andrew has said he wouldn't have normally gone to politics. I normally would not have gone to politics. I was approached by a bunch of people asking, why would you go into politics when you could do so many other things? And I would explain to them, this is the thing. This is the spiritual, ethical, religious thing that we have to do. People who think that they are in the know, if they truly believe that they're in the know, they have to exhaust themselves to have conversations around how we can become included in society. And so I think we were all talking about UBI, but yeah, I've been a UBI advocate and strategist trying to figure out how to implement it for maybe the past 15 years, definitely since 2006. And so I think anyone running on the idea that a UBI is a scalable dividend, sort of a market-based, capitalistic, scalable dividend, it is likely based on essays and books that I've published eons ago. And to that point, so after I stopped running my last race, I want to say March or April of 2018, I was introduced to a guy named Andy Stern, who used to be the president of the largest labor union on the planet, the SEIU, the Service Employees International Union. He said, you got to meet this guy, Andrew Yang, who's going to run for president. And at first, I laughed. I thought, okay, whatever. And anyway, I went down to his office. I met Andrew and Zach and Matt and the rest of those guys. And I think the first thing, if I remember, that I said, when I said, I was like, I thought I was ambitious, but you're running for president. And the whole office laughed. I was like, but I'm here, man. Let's talk, let's talk about data and how we leverage it as an asset. Because I think what Andy, not Andrew, thought that I had to add to the sort of rhetorical package was for the statisticians of the world and for the policy wonks of the world who want to know, all right, I hear you on the UBI, but how do you really facilitate that? How do you get it done? We were able to elaborate for them how data was really the key. And so I think when people hear data, technology is invoked, it seems other than ourselves. But our technological lives are not separate from our lives, not at all. Data is really just evidence. So let's like leave data and the word tech on the table for a minute. All of that stuff is just evidence of how we exist as humans. And so what we're really saying when we say we're owed a dividend is I have evidence of it per the data, but the data doesn't matter as much as the legal argument that if the essence of my life and the value of my community is an input to the economic productivity of any institution who wants to supply us goods and services, whether it's cyclical goods or financial goods or pharmaceutical goods or real estate goods or technological goods, then they owe us something. And so my pitch to Yang was, because we've written into policies like Europe's General Data Protection Regulation and Ohio's General Data Protection Regulation and Colorado's and Virginia's and this new bill coming out of California and stuff coming out of South Carolina, or the cyber reg coming out of the New York Department of Financial Services, all of these regs are starting to establish new human rights around your digital personhood, for lack of better phrases. And the reason we've been working on that, so that's been my work for the past 10 years. The reason any of that stuff matters is because it's giving us now the legal right to say we actually own that evidence and you owe us for leveraging this evidence to create products and services. And it's not about Amazon or companies like that. It's really about every institution on the planet. Every institution on the planet makes decisions about how they supply products and services based on either employees or consumers. So all data is personal data because anything that matters exists to facilitate human existence. So they owe us a whole lot. And so when Andrew says humanity first, we're saying the exact same thing. We just, in a more narrow space, I don't have to campaign in Iowa and New Hampshire. I tell people, like the preacher, when he says you have favor in church on Sundays, I say, I can show you on a spreadsheet. I can show you for a fact that you are valuable. And the opportunity, the political opportunity here is really just that. It's to tell people you are valuable. And I mean it. Not, I'll give you a check because you're destitute or because you need it. It is an opportunity to talk about the poor, not just talk about the working. But the biggest opportunity that we have is to say humanity first, or to say you have an intrinsic value, and to not be cliche or corny about it. To say, I mean, if we don't all adopt the idea that we have value, that we derive it from each other, and that we're entitled to an equity stake and that value that we derive from each other, then we're going to lose everything that we love about being humans in this space, in this time, in this place. And so that's why we're running for office, because it's time to take the tech conversations and make them religious.
Yeah. No, I felt like I just went to data church just now.
We're working on it. We're gonna work on that next.
That's just like a nerd church.
I'll come. Yeah.
So here's the thing, like as someone who in my day job work in the tech industry, this makes a lot of sense to me. Data is extremely valuable, and it's something that we all own about ourselves. Sure. I wonder when you're running for Congress and you're talking to people who don't work in tech, and they hear data and they're like, well, what is that like? Is that like the speed of my internet connection? Like, why are you talking to me about this?
Right.
You know, how do you make it relatable to people who don't think about this stuff all the time?
You have to brand, you have to take it to something that they care about more, right? Like I was on another podcast and people were talking to me about, and we were just tweeting about the other day about pharmaceutical data and the subsidies that pharmaceutical companies get and how poorly they're treating employees across different industries. And it's really about storytelling. So I normally tell a story in that space about a woman named Henrietta Lacks. And for anyone who's not familiar, Google Henrietta Lacks. And there's a book about her called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. She was a woman who died of cervical cancer back in the 50s. They kept her cancerous cells. She was in her early 30s, and they commodified them and used them in academia. And her cell set served as the seminal research base for every disease that we've cured over the course of the past 60 years. Polio, that was her. The human genome mapping, that was her. She created a $1 trillion industry based on her tissue sample, and her family didn't get a dime for it. And when I talk to people about data, I don't have to actually talk about data because data is everything. Data is not the new oil, neither is technology. Data is the new matter, and it is everything that matters. We will put a data point on every moving particle and measure everything in the world, period. And as we do that, we will start to validate our diversity in such a narrow way that all that will become valuable is evidence of our existence, period. And so when I stump and I talk to people about the universal basic income that they're owed, I'm never really talking about data. I'm talking about the idea that everyone feels like they're due more from this economy. The people working 2 or 3 jobs who are still dead broke, they're like, I need something more. The people who make 100K in New York, who can't afford to really live in New York, because that is no money in New York. A beer is $9, you know. They feel like they're due more. And so the political conversation is back to the basics. You are valuable and you are due more. And what are you willing to do to demand the more that you're owed? And so, we've branded our campaign on having a conversation around what we owe us because it sounds like hip hop, and hip hop is bigger than politics.
Let me ask you, let me play devil's advocate with you about Henrietta.
Sure.
So if I worked for one of the big pharma companies, I could say, well, you know what? She was compensated for participating in some study. She signed this document which says anything that she does or gives us will be ours forever and ever. She didn't have to do that. If she didn't do it, we would have found someone else who did. Why do we have to give her like half of all of our profits?
Sure. So here would be my answer. Here would be a good lawyer's answer, which I am not, but I think engineers are better at lawyering than lawyers, because lawyers are trained at risk aversion and we're trained at problem solving. But per that, any contract where you are ignorantly engaged in that contract and you take a sort of take it or leave it fee, which, by the way, which was not her case, right? They just took her sales and used them. But let's say she was knowledgeably in play. Let's say, for the sake of your argument, as devil's advocate, which, by the way, devil's advocate would just be saying you submit your soul to the devil. This isn't necessarily advocating for the devil, but let's play on it. The idea here is it's called a contract of adhesion. So my work over the course of the past decade has been writing laws that give you a constitutional agency or constitutional ownership right over your evidence of your personhood, which we would call personal data. As you now have that constitutional ownership, you can make an argument around your ownership on in every contract of adhesion that you're locked into, whether it's with Instagram or it's with that pharmaceutical company, to say, look, I am not worth the entire market value of the productivity that has come from my cell and data mining, but I am entitled to a piece of that value. I'm not saying that Jeff Bezos isn't worth $50 million. I'm saying I know for a fact that he's not worth $150 billion. The rest of that money is ours, and we should be able to live and eat on it. And it's not just his company, and it's not just the pharmaceutical companies. It's every institution. If I invite you to the table of productivity, I want to be a bit philosophical and nerdy here, since your show is with the nerds.
Oh, this is the place to do it.
Yeah, this is the place. Let's tumble way down this rabbit hole. I am saying at the table of productivity that humans do not create value. They contribute it intrinsically. But groups of humans, institutions, even companies, you name it, they do create value, because at that table, even if I pay you a wage or a retainer for your time, which a wage is, you come to the table, we both participate a bit, we're exchanging ideas right here, and productivity will proliferate from it because people will gain knowledge from these communications. The question should be asked at the end, after it is productive, what of that productivity are you entitled to? And what am I entitled to? Now, if I take 99.9% of the value and I don't give you any, number one, it's ethically inept, but it's also economically inept. It's inefficient. And by us not spreading enough of the value that proliferates from our interaction, we actually stifle the economy, which is really saying we're stifling our ability to interact well because you don't have enough to really play with me. And that's what's happening in the economy over and over and over again. And so my response would be, first off, Henrietta is locked into a contract of adhesion. You owe her some more money. You don't owe her all of the money from that productivity, but you definitely owe her something. And we should have a legal fight around what that number is. And that number, I can tell you at the very minimum, is $1,000 a month. Universal basic income does not end at $1,000 a month. That's the initial bonus that every non-working and working person gets that they could never negotiate. I've been in a bunch of executive roles, and I know going company by company that there are only a few of us who have the ability to negotiate a bonus on top of our wages. Most people, they don't. They're like, I'll come in for $15 an hour, whatever the minimum wage is, I'll do that. And that's fine. But everyone needs to, if they're a participant in a productive process, they need to be able to take an equity stake or dividend from that productive process. It's not only right economically, but it's right ethically, it's right morally. If we continue to scale productivity and lock people out of that productivity equation, we're going to have a lot of chaos on our hands. And I'll be right there with the people, ready to burn everything down if I can't get mine. Because that's really why I'm in this. I'm desperate, just like everyone else. We should all be up in arms about our UBI because the world owes us, because we exist, and we're all that's valuable. Everything that exists in the world is humans have created it to better accommodate their lives. And we're
So what's your view on funding that $1,000 a month? Where do you think it should come from? How should it be collected?
It's a dividend. So so the way dividends work is it's about $2 trillion for American adults, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of that 2 trillion, give or take, it's about $2 trillion. So, and basically, if you run a corporation and you make $100 in productivity, to be very clear with the audience, productivity is a measure of revenues, right? And so after you pay your expenses with those revenues, I say that's $50. Then you pay your taxes. That's another 10 to 20%, which we know there are a lot of ways to avoid and evade taxes. The rest of that is really for what we would call shareholders. Now, aside from shareholders, what we're doing by giving everyone an ownership stake in their input to society is create a new class of stakeholders. And this dividend will be paid out to stakeholders across the 5.3 million companies in the United States. Now, most people understand taxes. So I imagine Yang is talking about UBI as a value add tax.
Mm-hmm.
Been around for a long while, and it's a conversation. I don't like to talk about it as a tax at all. I think, demons like Grover Norquist have branded taxes and killed the potential of them for all of us. He and the neocons have. But beyond taxes, I think it is necessary to talk about a UBI as a dividend specifically because it validates someone's valuable contribution to productivity. And that's really the play here is we not only have to restore economic stability, we have to restore dignity and how people get their economic stability. And so just telling them I'm taxing a rich man and giving it to you, people understand taxes as, oh, that's Jeff Bezos' money, it's not mine. The way I'm communicating it is, you need to understand this is Jeff is riding around in your money. His Rolls Royce could be broken up into 1 million Ford Tauruses that are yours. And why isn't that happening? The problem in society today is we don't feel like we're owed anything. Andrew is dying. Hold on really quick for me.
Oh, Jeff heard you. All right, guys, while we're waiting for James to fire up his backup computer, I do want to briefly apologize to Ted. Ted, I know we are a open conversation type channel, but I think a lot of people felt that the contributions were not constructive. So I had to block you, my friend. Sorry, my friend. But if you want to email me, I can try and unblock you in the future if you want to just try and keep the conversation constructive. It's okay. You could disagree, but just try not to like get people like overly emotional. While we're waiting for James to come back in, let me just say, what an interesting guy, huh? He definitely knows how to tell a story. And he sounds like he's got like he can handle the follow-up questions. So as soon as he comes back in, we will definitely continue the conversation. What I'd love to do next, once James fires up his backup computer, is I'd love to talk to him about how he and Yang have communicated and how he might work with Yang in a Yang administration if he's in the Congress and Yang's in the White House. And then the other thing I wanted to get his input on was how he thinks Yang is doing in the 13th district of New York. Yang has certainly a reputation of doing really well with kind of the tech savvy Twitter audience. And I'd be curious, like, is the Yang message starting to break through on the ground in places like Harlem? But we'll see what James says when he jumps back in. In the meantime, let me see if there's any questions. Reed Anderson is just saying, don't apologize. Just say we're not interested in trolls here. Yes, that's true. Oh, I see James is coming back in. All right, James, okay. I see you, my friend.
Okay, I'm back. Apologies. My team isn't as elaborate as Yang, so my computer died.
Yeah, I tell you, Jeff Bezos heard you talking smack about him. He was like, "Shut it down, shut it down now."
Thing. Yeah, he is. Yeah, well, that should be the war. I mean, we really should be having a moral conversation around. Look, I like what people like Bernie and AOC were saying about, why do we live in a world with these hyper billionaires? Mm-hmm. The problem is and it's always been, again, it's always a political and sort of religious, for lack of better words, conversation around who is due what. And so the real reason I'm excited that, people like Yang are running, and people like, Bernie and Elizabeth and AOC mm-hmm. before me, she ran the same year I ran and got in there, is we're starting to have these moral conversations. And that should be the driver for all these economic conversations. Economics just exists to distribute our moral will. It's a mathematical way to distribute who we think should be included and who shouldn't. And I think that's where we.
So let me ask you this: let's make believe you win. You're in Congress.
Oh, we're winning. Yeah.
Oh, you do it, and then our boy Andrew gets into the White House.
Yeah.
And he says, "Hey, I promised everybody a freedom dividend funded by a value-added tax."
Yep.
What's your opinion? Would you say like, hey, I want to tweak it a little bit, or why don't we do it a different way? Or I mean, everybody's approach is a little different. I'd be curious how you see yourself working with the Yang administration and what you'd want to contribute to it.
So I think, well, first things first, it'd be Congress's job to put the bill on his desk. So, mm-hmm. No matter what a president says, it usually has to come out of the lower house, a bill that is. And so, if folks look, a VAT is, and I get this is probably going to go out everywhere, but it's communications. That's all it is. I've met a lot of people when I explain a dividend, they go, "Isn't that like a tax?" And no, it's not. But a tax is just a word. You can choose to call it whatever you want. If we thought we were taxing the 5.3 million companies who pay taxes here in the United States mm-hmm. At the rate of about universal basic income, would do it monthly instead of annually to start, then I would be happy to lobby and whip and try to put that bill, on his desk. Now, what would happen is there'd be a rigorous process of other people trying to brand the bill. And that's why I think we need strong advocates who are able to have the conversation around what a UBI really is and how it's distributed, who understand financial economics, microeconomics, and microeconomics to get it in there. But yeah, day one, it would be, I'm assuming, my job to put the bill on his desk. And that's what we would plan to do. And we would do it, sure, as a VAT. What I'm essentially saying here is the $2 trillion in a weighted fashion, corporation by corporation, is the $2 trillion, whether we call it a VAT or not. We're still insisting that it go to a stakeholder class. And I think still, as we communicate that this is going out, the rhetorical work would be communicating to people that they deserve this. And the actual bill, I think, would look more like a general data protection regulation that assists based on the information that's going into these corporations that the VAT comes back out. So the policy looks different than the rhetoric.
So in that instance, would we argue, or would you argue that companies that are using more data would pay more towards the dividend than, let's say, a company that doesn't use that much data but generates a lot of value and profit?
No.
Okay.
No, because again, remember, like I said in the beginning, data is just a sort of reference point to value in general. So like I said, when I said every company is a data company, I mean every single institution. An email that you send as a project manager somewhere, that's personal data. When you walk into the building, that's personal data. If there are sensors in your seat, and I've seen corporations who make furniture with sensors in it to look at corporate space, that's data. If you serve in a role and someone takes an insurance contract out on you because you have a trade secret, that's personal data. Everything you give, the essence of you, the diversity that you bring to the table at that corporation, is data. And so there would be a different payout based on the size, excuse me, the size of those institutions. But it's not based on data use, because remember, data is everything. The reason that these general data protection laws are important are because they actually make data itself a wash. So the first thing I would do day one, which is a thing that I've been touting for years, is establish a data bill of rights. It looks very similar to JFK's Consumer Bill of Rights. And the reason a Bill of Rights, which is not policy, is similar to the Green New Deal. It's suggestions. It's a political stance. It's a rhetorical tool. But the reason it's important is because it lets everyone know what they have. And it lets everyone know what they should, that we agree as a society they can argue on behalf of in a court of law. And that data Bill of Rights would look like 6 principles. The right to erasure, which is like the right to be forgotten. The right to portability, which is the right to move your stuff wherever you want. The right to restrictive processing, which is the right to say stop. The right to redress, which is the right to be indemnified from legal discourse. The right to education, which is pretty obvious. And the right to ownership. So those 6 rights in a data Bill of Rights would, in fact, disrupt every institution and how they exist, to say the intellectual property that they once thought was solely theirs is now up for negotiation per the contracts of adhesion that they're in with individuals about what they owe those people for their input to productivity. And so I'm not necessarily looking at how much data you pull into your institution. I'm looking at the fact that you exist and you are a representation of all of us as your institution is grand.
Yeah. All right. Well, let me play contrarian.
Okay. Different than devil's advocate.
I will not advocate for the devil, but let me play contrarian. So let's say I work for I don't know, like Minute Maid, like an orange juice company.
Yep.
And I'm like, hey, James, Amazon's over in Seattle. Go after Bezos. He's the one that's got everybody's purchasing data.
Yeah.
I just make orange juice. Yeah, I collect data in terms of how many cartons I've sold, but I'm not the one tracking, what you bought or when you bought or from who you bought and then retargeting ads at you. I just sell orange juice. Why are you, what's this to me?
So that's they're wrong. They be lying. And the thing is, they're a part of a broad supply chain. If I go into a convenience store here in New York, we have Dwayne Reed's, and other places people have CVS or Walgreens, you name it. If I walk into hypothetical Dwayne Reed, I'm thirsty, it's a sunny day here in New York, and I pull out my debit card and I pick a Dasani over Aquafina. That's a Coke product versus a Pepsi product. When I pick up that Aquafina, I made a choice. Well, mainly because I like distilled water instead of spring water, but some people like other things. Maybe I was marketed to like that. I don't know. You know, I'm affected by all this. If I see a hamburger on TV or a Minute Maid, I want some. You know, so if I make Sunny Delight, Procter & Gamble is implicated, right? The moment I make a decision, swipe my card, buy that product, I have validated the bottling company, the material company, but also the refrigerator company, the real estate company, my bank, their bank. There's some fintech in the middle. A supply chain of value exists based on the fact that at some point in time, I'm going to get thirsty. Even if I didn't go and buy it for a fee, even if I went to the Salvation Army right here on 138th Street and I picked up one of those paper cone cups because I need water at some point because I'm human, a supply chain that gets that cone cup to me via that institution proliferates. And they're all only validated by the idea that I need water. So I don't care whether you make Sunny Delight or Minute Maid or whether you make, you know, Amazon Prime and distribute to me all of my books at a cheaper price, and I would rather sell them to you at. You owe us some of the market value of that productivity, period. You all owe us. And that's the way Americans and global citizens should be thinking about every company, whether it's the 5.3 million companies here or the 3.5 in Brazil or the nearly 3 in France. All of these institutions are really just collectives of individuals, and they just exist to be the fiduciary custodian of our public trust. And so we make it to the point where we go, you know what? Minute Maid is obsolete. We want the other thing. This will make a true market proliferate where we say what is good and what is being provided to us. Period.
Okay. So I could imagine this video will be available on YouTube on replay. And I could imagine people who are not super progressive saying, "Oh my God, these socialists." You know,
I'm not a socialist.
But yeah, their argument will be, look at this conversation. They're vilifying these great American companies, these innovative companies. You know, Jeff Bezos worked his butt off. He started out of a garage. He created something from nothing. Yep. And now by saying, you know, everybody's going to take all of the value out of that company, no one's going to ever want to start a company again. And, you know, we're going to be like Venezuela. That'll be like a argument.
You're right. So per that argument, my husband's from Venezuela and so are my in-laws. They immigrated here in an undocumented fashion. They have since gotten, you know, their paperwork together in the early 2000s. I'm a hardcore capitalist. I think, you know, as a Black queer man originally from Detroit, which if anyone doesn't know, Detroit is not the nicest place on the planet. I sort of had to flee Detroit 20 years ago to try to make it in New York. And I know that the only reason that people who look like me are allowed to participate in this space and time is because the market insisted on it. There was business available for us to participate. And that has nothing to do with socialism at all. The kick here is, I'm never saying that the boss isn't worth twice as much as the employees. I do think Jeff Bezos's leadership and ability to sustain risk to build his company at relentless.com. Everyone should go to relentless.com and see what's there before they go to Amazon. But the fact that he did that certainly puts him a step ahead. I'm not an egalitarian, and nor is Andrew or anyone in this movement. But I am saying that he's not worth 500 times what I'm worth. And I do know as someone who has founded companies, I think I founded a dozen different companies at this point. I've been an extraordinary failure. Only 5 of them still exist and are doing well and have provided jobs for people. But I'm that guy. I'm the blue suit, red tie guy. And I'm telling you, as a capitalist in the room, that I, when starting every company, owned too much of every company I've ever started, but we haven't had the proper distribution mechanism to get people what they're owed. And so as an engineer, the problem that I've been trying to solve is how we distribute value in the same way that engineers just used to look at how we distribute energy. And I think we've solved that problem. And I think we'll bring it to fruition through new voices and new storytellers and new faces like Andrew and myself and so many others. And
Well,
that's the fix.
Yeah, no, and I, as a fellow former startup founder, your hit batting average is actually pretty good. If any of them, manage to live a few years, I'm
pretty lucky.
Improbable.
Yeah.
Well, I know we're running a little short on time, James, but I did want to kind of follow up on a few areas before we wrap up. And one was, you mentioned some really strong candidates in the presidential primaries right now, like Bernie and Warren in particular. I was a Bernie supporter last time around. And I was curious, have you made up your mind around who you're, endorsing or spending most of your time supporting? Or is your position, hey, I like them all, they're all better than the current incumbent in the White House? Like, how are you thinking about your role in the Democratic primary, the presidential primary?
I mean, we already endorsed Yang after I met him. I was the first person to endorse him. I think some kid put it all over Wikipedia, apparently. They, I think, took it from my Instagram. But I'm a Democrat. I'm an elected Democrat. I started as an outsider and realized I had to punch my way through the party. And so I'm an elected member of New York's county committee. And we, do the majority of the politicking in the most dense place in the country. And I've been doing all of my work really for Yang, but to really be adjacent to Yang, to say it's not a one-off idea with a gimmick, right? Mm-hmm. Now, with regards to everyone else, I was a Hillary vote last time, not a Bernie vote. Bernie's vote, in my opinion, will never shrink or grow. He is what ideally the Green Party should have offered up a long time ago. And we see Bernie sort of stagnating out in the polls right now. Elizabeth just toppled him. I'm assuming that Kamala and Andrew will in the next month. And then I think Andrew will move ahead of the other two going into the new year. Bernie is not a Democrat. And at some point, in politics is, it's a community sport. And you have to play it as if you are part of the community. So you can't come in and out of the community when you choose. You have to be in it and get dirty in it and take your piece of it. And because he was never in it with the Democrats, the base of the party will never come to his aid in the way that he needs to scale. Mm-hmm. Now, Andrew is a Democrat. He's new. He's not an elected official, but he's a Democrat's Democrat. And when asked about if he would run a third party candidacy, he goes back to the real thing that we're trying to do here is protect our way of life against the terrorists that's in the White House. And he says, I would never do anything to jeopardize a Democrat beating Donald Trump. But I think the advantage that Andrew Yang has, and what the Democratic Party, in my opinion, is desperately trying to hide, is the fact that he has so much sway with libertarians and conservatives. I do as well. People come to me and say, you're red tie. You sound like a Republican talking about business. What about socialism? And I'm like, I don't speak French. I'm not a socialist. I'm not a democratic socialist. I can't grow roses on my porch in the brick city that I live in. But I think Andrew has the strongest chance of beating the old man in the office. But I also like behind him Kamala and Elizabeth Warren. But to that case, I like Kamala more than Warren and Biden and Bernie, because I don't think that baby boomers, people born before 1964, have the toolkit. And I get that this may be offensive to some folks, but I can say it because I live in Harlem and I can say whatever I want. I don't think that they have the toolkit to solve any of our 21st century problems. And that's the real, that's the real kick here. The main reason that I think, even introduced to Andrew Yang is because he was a 44-year-old that gets that there's wisdom that can come from a 38-year-old with regards to how we distribute value in our economy and value in our culture. So So I'm rooting for the Gen X guy. You know, I'm rooting for Yang first and foremost. And with regards to the people in my district, I don't think they know him well enough, but I think they are getting to know him over time. And I think our candidacy is helping push that along. And it's an important community per the base of the party, because the base of the Democratic Party are still Black women who are part of labor unions.
Yeah.
And that's
So
the real deal.
how do you think he's doing with Black women who are part of labor unions, and what can he do to break through further to really kind of become a top tier candidate the way we want him to be?
Well, I don't think he's doing great at this point, but I think he's tracking along the right pace. I think he's doing the right things. And I think the real problem with Andrew Yang, or even a Pete Buttigieg, who was just here in Harlem with a bunch of influencers, is there's a lack of trust in general. People don't like talking about data and tech who have already been sort of co-opted and appropriated. They feel like, oh, Silicon Valley is just going to come and make us a new type of slave. And I really do mean that in a racial, cultural way. They feel like it's dehumanizing, right? Which is why we don't necessarily talk about data. We talk about Henrietta Lacks. We talk about what people are owed for their input to culture. So I think that the peace offering that a Yang would have to make is he'd have to spend more time with those women when he gets done with the Iowas and New Hampshires. Again, there's a process to do this. And he has to go and talk about humanity first, just like Martin Luther King talked about getting to the mountaintop. And he has to acknowledge that everyone's road to the mountaintop is not the same. It's not like how I think a Bernie or Joe or Elizabeth or even a Kamala would talk about it and saying everyone's going to the same place. That's whack. That's not the 21st century. Everyone may not be going to the same place, but glazing over people's unique cultural experience and what their data produces is the same as saying, I don't see color. That's the most dangerous thing that we can do in the 21st century. We have to fully otherize everyone. And as we recognize their otherness, we have to talk about how valuable that is and how it caters to the overall value of the melting pot that is this country. And I think that Andrew can do it because I've talked to him about it and he's done it. I mean, when I dap him up, first time I met him, I was like, he's a big dude. He's not, you know, his head is bigger than mine. He looks like he could be the president. You know, I just go, anyone taller than me with a bigger head than mine could probably be the president. And when I met him, I was like, you know, he can play a little ball. He can do everything. So I think the more people get to meet him and the more that there's a collective of us talking about human value around him, the more comfortable people will become with him. And again, our president has always been, from George Washington onward, more of a spiritual leader. For regardless of however people see him, Donald Trump is a spiritual leader of his base, and their spirit is hate. Barack Obama, you know, he sort of died on the cross of respectability for so many of us and really represented what progress looked like. George Bush was essentially an evangelical. You know, Bill Clinton repped the ethos of the 90s via that one instance where he was on the Arsenio Hall show. And every single president before them going forward. And so if the work of a political campaign is justice, which Yang is talking about a lot with UBI, and hope is a policy that gives people evidence of some ray of light somewhere down the road, then change has to really be embodied by that person's face. Like Andrew has to embody what the 21st century looks like and tell people of all walks of life that they're a part of it. And he has to make the people who feel like they were never getting an opportunity to participate in the first place, that they're also a part of it, and that they're in fact the most integral part of it. And those are those women who work for unions across the country. But I think he can do it.
Yeah, well, you know, we talk a lot about Iowa and New Hampshire, and then South Carolina comes soon after, different demographic. And I wonder, it sounds like this stump speech that he's been dialing in for the last few months may need to evolve as his audience does.
It does. Yeah. It has to go from talking about what he should always bring up what the opposite of Donald Trump is. He should always bring up what the new oil is, the tech and tech checks. That's great. I like it. I like it all. We do a similar thing. But talking about who he is and talking about who other people are and validating it as good is so necessary, because the only way to beat the homogenous hate machine that Donald Trump has built, which is, let's say, 25 to 30% of the electorate, is to include more people, get more people excited about a coalition, knowing that those people don't actually like each other, because some of them feel disenfranchised by each other. You know, I think people in my district, Black people, Dominican people, Puerto Rican people, they're more scared of progressives than conservatives, because they think progressives have a tendency to turn a blind eye to, you know, their real struggles. And so, you know, as Andrew's rhetoric, his stump speeches evolve, I think they'll evolve, into something more of, you know, what church looks like in a truly inclusive place. And again, I think he can do it because I've heard him do it. And, you know, just being in politics in general, we're hearing a lot of practice rhetoric from, you know, from a lot of different camps. And so, yeah, as he moves into South Carolina, instead of talking about Martin Luther King back in UBI, he's to talk about the real reason that Martin Luther King is dead, which is because he was probably going to spark a real movement around UBI. And I get that plays into all sorts of conspiracy theories and et cetera. But the reality is the sentiment of the most disenfranchised people on the planet, which are usually Black and brown people who are same gender loving and or queer, is they are always available to consider the fact that they're being stumped out. And so you have to play to that first. And you have to play to non-working, impoverished people first, instead of how the Democrats talk about poverty, which is just from a standpoint of working. The biggest problem, and I'll finish this rant because I feel like I'm running on, the biggest problem with progressives and socialists in the Democratic Party who talk about values, they talk about it from the standpoint of work, which essentially says you are only valuable as you work. And Andrew's message, among others, needs to be that we shouldn't have to earn the right to live, and talk about how valuable our culture is and how we need to get back to community. And that will be a message that resonates not only with those people in South Carolina, but all sorts of folks, because that's what we do across the country as, you know, cultural sects, you know, neighborhood by neighborhood, city by city. So I think he will.
James, I feel like we could talk for a lot longer, but I know you got to do some phone banking, and hopefully we can get you back on the show, because I have so many follow-up questions that we don't have time to get to today. But I'm looking at the chat room. There's a lot of people very interested in learning about you. And I'm sure the replay and the clips that I'll put together will get a lot of reach. And I do want to just ask you, is there anything else that you wanted to share? So for some of the people, there were some people saying like, hey, I live in New York, I haven't heard of this guy. How do I learn more about him? What can they do?
I think if they want to donate, they can go to votejfk.org. If they want to know more about me, they can just Google James Felton Keith, or go to jamesfeltonkeith.com. I'm on the internet, folks. I'm everywhere, you know, at least digitally, and we try to be as many places as possible here in the district. And if you're in New York or in the tri-state area, we'd love to have your support, even if it's from a volunteer standpoint. You know, we're trying to get to 1,000 volunteers by January, and we want to deploy those volunteers onto the district to make sure that we get out the vote on June 23rd.
Awesome. Well, James, I wish you all the best. You definitely seem like someone who's thought a lot about these hard problems, and I appreciate you participating in our democratic process. And hopefully, we'll get to know more of you as time goes on.
I'll be around
and see you on the Hill.
Thank you. We'll get there
with President Yang.
Let's do it. Let's make it happen, baby. Yeah.
All right, man.
All right.
We'll catch you next time.
I'll see you.
Thank you.
Yeah.